Good afternoon again. Welcome back to Apologetics 101. And I don't know if you've had time to do a little bit of homework. I assigned you pages 1 through 15. Somebody thought that, she said, I thought I had to go through all the YouTube sites. So she said that was going to be hard. I said, no, you didn't have to do that now. That's for future. So I hope that you didn't feel it necessary to go through every site that I mentioned. That was hard work if you did, and I tell you what, if you did that, you come to me afterwards, you get a free meal with me. I'm taking you out to eat dinner somewhere, okay? It's maybe not tonight, but at some point in time. Now turn with me, if you would please, to the Scientific Breakthroughs page, and that would be really beginning on page 11. Beginning on page 11. Patrick Tepedino is working the video for me today, and will be for the rest of the series. Patrick is a Bob Jones student. He works at my law office and I'm trying to convince him to go into law, but I think there are others that are trying to get him to go a different direction. But if I have my way about it, he will be Esquire in a few years. A brilliant young man, and he could be easily doing this. And I know that there are people in this audience and at this church, as a matter of fact, who are much better qualified, actually, to do an apologetics series than me. So I feel right privileged that Pastor has asked me to do this. I was recruited to go to the Philippines, where I taught an apologetics series, and Dr. Jim Benny had known of my interest in teaching overseas. Now that I've kind of gone into somewhat of a retirement mode, not completely, but somewhat, and have a lot of time on my hands, and I've been studying apologetics for some time, all the way back in seminary when I was doing a Master of Divinity degree at Southwestern Baptist, and I was a research student for Dr. Russ Bush, who later became Dr. Russ Bush of Southeastern Theological Seminary. He was the academic dean after the conservatives took over the Southern Baptist Convention. So he and I had many conversations. He came from a science background. He would have loved the angle that is now available to us as Christians and endangers the very lives of radical skeptics. Now, before anybody gets offended, just remember that I admitted to you, and I actually have a chapter in my presentation. Chapter 5, I call it. I don't even deserve chapter headings, really, because it's a short paper, really, that you have in front of you. But I was a skeptic for many years, really, from the time I was 17 till into my 20s into college, and even a little bit in graduate school. So I have put myself through the rigors of analysis. And it was useful often when I was in an undergraduate at the University of North Carolina. I was studying philosophy. I was a philosophy major, and then I got a master's degree in philosophy at Texas Christian University while I was doing the Master of Divinity degree, and all that kind of was in sync and kind of worked together. A big deal back then was something called language analysis, and even C.S. Lewis had trouble trying to figure out what language analysis conceivably could do. And it turned out it just was a matter of, it ran its course, and it's no longer something that is an endangering force to Christianity. However, it was a big deal 35, 40 years ago. And so I sort of got immersed in that little world to some degree. I sometimes think it's the same thing as, has anybody in here heard of string theory in the world of physics? A few people have heard of string theory. I suspect that's the way of string theory. You watch and just see. It could be string theory will provide something, but since it has no experimental counterpart, I'm speaking sort of in a narrow sense to the people that raise their hands, since it does not seem to have an experimental counterpart, I think it will probably just fizzle kind of like language analysis did. But I don't want to take you down a road that's too esoteric. Let's get right to it. By way of review from last week, as you recall, if you were here, I presume most of you were here last week, we talked about the way we were going to try to approach Any skeptic, whether you are sitting here with skeptical ideas in your mind, and I suppose that's 95% of you. There are very few of us that don't have serious questions and want an answer. Can you call that skepticism? Well, on a road or a continuum, you might think of that as being sort of, well, everybody's got a question. Well, that's a degree of skepticism, perhaps. If you have a question, want it answered, don't understand, how is this explained? How often have I done that, and perhaps you too? If you have a rigorous, somewhat rigorous analytical mind, where you want answers to everything. You come across something in Scripture or something happens in the world and you say, what? Could you explain that, please? You sort of throw your hands up. God, would you please, what is that about? Or explain this in the Bible. I mean, this doesn't quite seem to make sense. Would you please help me with this, Lord? How many of you have not gone through that? I can only presume if you have not gone through that, you really haven't done any kind of serious study of Scripture. How many of you have read Scripture straight through? The question I asked my students in the Philippines. Everybody raise your hand. Hopefully, most everybody will raise your hand. Read Scripture straight through, the entire Bible straight through. I suppose that's 2/3 of the group. To get a coherent view of Scripture, just this is a little add-on today. To get a coherent view of Scripture, you really need to have read Scripture straight through, start to finish, and that will give you a sense of the uniformity of concepts. And that's one of the thematic ideas that I think is absolutely mandatory and is something that pulled me out of a deep skepticism into something much more approximating, not just a belief that this is real, but it gave me confidence in understanding what was going on. That coupled with fulfillment of prophecy, in particular the resurrection, the death, the incarnation, and resurrection, which we will celebrate next week. The reality of that, the prophesying of that in the Old Testament, the fulfillment of that was quite startling to me as I knew that from the time I was 6, maybe 5. My daddy was a Baptist preacher, and he was pretty good too. He was pretty good. But there's knowing and there's understanding. Do you understand the difference? Do you know the difference? That was a joke. There's knowing something and there's getting it, really comprehending it. But when I began to comprehend in my late teens and early 20s, coupled with the answering of these questions that I had as a skeptic, this is what really took me surging out of what had been a negative skepticism into an apologetics mode where I really wanted to defend the faith. Now, I still had a skeptic side, but I wanted to defend the faith. And every time I'd run across somebody, as a matter of fact, that seemed to be, I'd want to engage them. And it wasn't out of a sense of meanness, it was out of a sense of inquiry. You don't believe that? Really? Now, explain kind of why, because I've sort of been studying this. I try to have a little lilt in my voice. Now, sometimes, anybody can be mean, and sometimes I'd have my days, obviously, and if you're studying philosophy, if you're in graduate school in philosophy, then the encounter sometimes will not be all that pleasant, but and it can be very, very confrontational. But those are not really efficacious. I mean, we have ugly confrontations. What are we as Christians trying to do when we do encounter people that we want to try to win? You're trying to bring them to some degree of truth. The worst thing you can do is so present yourself that they end up hating you. There is a wonderful apologist named Frank Trueck, Truek, I think is the way he spells his name. I may pop up one of his videos because he's really quite sharp. He lives in Charlotte. He has a ministry. He's written a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But there is one video that is really kind of funny. It's one of the best ones as far as him presenting sequentially exactly what we're looking at. He does it so quickly you don't get the profoundness of it. It's more like just sort of clicking off things. You don't quite get. But part of the debate with Hitchens, who has died a few years ago, but that was a debate. He was back and forth in the question and answer and was really quite vociferous. And I thought, you didn't need to say it like that, Frank. You could have been a little nicer the way you said it. And he turned the audience, which was sort of both sides. He turned the audience very negatively. And what does this have to do with apologetics? Well, we're told to be able to defend ourselves, but we're also instructed to do it in a certain way. And that is with a sense not of meanness and aggression, but in a sense of kindness. So you're wanting to be kind in how you do present yourself. I had an encounter with a skeptic on Friday. You ready for this? On Friday. I was taping for a radio show, and he's actually a friend, not like we go out to eat lunch, but somebody that I really like a lot. And we just started talking plenty of time before the radio show came on. I was asked to be on live in place of Joey Hudson, who was at the beach, and he couldn't be there and asked me to sub for him. So I was subbing on his 5 o'clock radio show, 94.5, and I started talking to this gentleman, and we got in a conversation. And before you knew it, we were talking about theological ideas. I told him when I was speaking, it might have started that way, talking about theological ideas. And the way I presented was to go over the very things we are covering here, one by one. Did you know? Isn't it interesting that? So I used those kind of terms. And I called his name and I said, well, it's interesting your skepticism at this point in time, because we've advanced quite a long way in the sciences and there have been some scientific breakthroughs. And I said, as far as preponderance of evidence, remember from last week, that's getting to the place in your evidence standard where it's more likely than not, that 50% idea. Remember, we took that and I kept talking about getting it to some point in somebody's mind where you're not letting them escape by simply making more excuses that they need more evidence. Wait. I said, how much evidence would you need to really get you to the place where you got out of this super hyper skeptical mode and really were open to things of the Lord? Where would you have to be? And then I talked about preponderance, just getting you there. He said, well, that probably would, if you could get me to 20 or 30 or 40%, that's pretty serious stuff. So like you, and I told him when I was young, I was looking for 30%. I mean, you just take away the idea that we Christians are believing something that we really know to be absurd, which I think is kind of a standard Mormonism. Surely you don't believe that. That kind of like that. No, we've got a lot of stuff backing us up, huge amounts of information that's backing us up. And so I first talked to him about the creation. Did you know that the standard now in modern physics is that there really was a creation? Now, contrary to what was called the steady state theory. Now, all of you now know what the steady state theory is, and I know you've done your homework and reviewed the steady state theory, so we don't really have to go over that, but I'll say it one more time anyway. That is the view that material stuff, matter, space, and time, and energy, matter/energy, space and time, was eternal, steady state. Therefore, since it did not have to be created because it was eternal, you did not have to have a creator. Everybody remember that? I repeated that about 8 or 10 times last week. Everybody got that steady state there. Everybody got that? If you don't have that, see me after class. Bring your notes and we will go through the underlines and all that. Okay, so I said, have you ever heard of this? And he said, well, yeah, I have. That's called the Big Bang. I said, that is called the Big Bang. That's exactly right. So we know there was a creation. They call that the Big Bang. They call it, their cosmologists call it Big Bang. There was a creation, period. There's no issue about that. The steady state theory, as of this point, is now gone. Now, notice the tone that I'm giving you. Am I saying the tone-wise, is that being mean? Does that sound mean? Little lilt in the voice, you get it? Little psychology going on. But I was lecturing to him. I was explaining to him the facts. And you can take on a tone if you've studied your notes carefully. Watch some stuff on your YouTube that I've given you on pages 3, 4, and 5 of your, and really kind of gotten familiar with them. It could sound with you something like this. Let's suppose it's your nephew, Patrick, for instance. Now, Patrick's my nephew, and he's come to me and said, Uncle Dave, I just want to tell you something. I'm really having some problems with my beliefs in God. And I'd say, well, that's interesting, Patrick. I'm not going to ask Patrick where it came from. I don't care. At this point, I want to go straight to the point. Patrick, are you aware that there was really a time creation, a point time creation, and the physicists call that the Big Bang? Have you not heard of that? Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Well, what that means is there was a beginning, there was a creation. Do you understand that from this? Yes. Do you understand what that's done to the theory of something called the steady state theory? So far, folks, all you've done is quoted a little bit, paraphrased out of your notes. Real simple, 2 points. There was a creation and the demise of what they, the cosmologists that are atheists, call steady state. Now gone. Guess what? We won an incredible argument that has been going on for only 3,000 years, and we won it in the last 50 years. Now, it's hard for me not to scream at Patrick. Like, what have you had your head under a rock in the past 20 years? How old are you? You know, that's a temptation. Am I going to do that if I want to win Patrick? No. I want to be nice to Patrick. I want to say, son, he's my nephew, but, son, now haven't you heard there's something called, you're lecturing a little bit. Have you ever heard this? Now, if there's a creation, isn't it a logical conclusion that there very well could be a creator? Doesn't that make sense? And I would explain that the reason why there's an argument against steady state or for steady state, that what it produced, they did not have to then explain where matter, space, and time energy came from. Since it was eternal, they never had to explain it, right? Did you know that? We never had discussions about that. All the debates, I bet I've had 300 debates over the years, and now that steady state's gone, guess the first thing they come up with? Well, where did God come from? Wait a minute, that was never an argument. When steady state was invoked, I never had to explain to you, or you never had to explain to me anything about God or matter, all that. But now that steady state is gone, you're wanting me to explain where God came. This is very interesting reversal. Are you following that subtlety? And it's a significant subtlety. It might sound small, but it's significant. Now all of a sudden they have to use that argument for what reason? Because they are not on terra firma. They suddenly lost the ground that supposedly I was sharing with them because God was eternal. I didn't have to explain where God came from. They were asserting that matter was eternal. Now we know matter's not eternal, it was created. Now their counter-argument, but where did God come from? Do you see what they've done? And that argument has now developed only in the past, really significantly in the past 30 or 40 years, as a counter-argument. So I gently say to Patrick, my nephew, who's kind of gone fringy on me, He's wanting to say that he's having serious questions, and I come back, but pal, don't you know that there was a creation? And a creation, does it not imply a creator? And he says, well, yeah, sort of. I said, well, let me give you a second point also. And this is what we're going to be talking about right now as we go into point number 2, as to the incredible breakthroughs we Christians have that were not existent 40 years ago. The closest we came to this next point that you see under number 2, and you'll turn please to page 11, is going to be the idea of something called fine-tuning. I heard a lecture at Southwestern Baptist Seminary when I was about 22 years old, and it was from Dr. William Toller, who had a strong science background. And Dr. Toller, one of our professors, who ended up teaching me New Testament, archaeology, and just a number of different things. I think I had Prof. Toller maybe 3 times. An athlete, brilliant, and fun, interesting, funny. He was just an all-around wonderful person, Dr. Toller. And he gave a lecture that was in most demand of any lecture, sermon at Southwestern. And we're talking, Southwestern Baptist Seminary is the largest seminary in the world. It's in Fort Worth, Texas. Their auditorium would make this look very small. I remember the services where you would have nearly 2,000 men singing, and it was incredible. I remember sometimes just stopping and saying, I wish I could just rivet this into my mind. It was so strong and so powerful. Most of those guys were good, very conservative fellows, out in Texas, you could imagine, and had, gun racks and everything. So they were like together. But these were men, these were men. I even adopted some of their ways. I had cowboy boots. Yeah, I did. Had cowboy boots and a black cowboy hat. And I became a Texan for a period of time. So Toller's message was phenomenal. The most demanded of all the messages at any point in time in the 4 years I was at Southwestern. And it was on the fine-tuning of the solar system. That we on the earth is at a 23-degree tilt, and it has a wobble. If the wobble were any greater than the 8%, then the seasons would vary so much we could probably not have life as we understand it. The tilt itself at 23 degrees, if it were only 3 degrees more or 3 degrees less, would create, and then he would propound on what it would do. We're at exact distance from the sun, 10 degrees closer, 10 degrees further, you could not have life. The exact amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in proportion made life possible. The core of the earth, and he would talk about the core. If it were any different, that it would make life on the exterior of the earth too hot. And so all these things, there were 10 items, one, and he would blast them off, one, and explain, two, and he did it in quick succession. And it was the most demanded of all the talks. That was my first little inkling of fine-tuning. We have come infinitely far, and what you're about to see is you're going to be immersed into the world of cosmic fine-tuning. But you will also see, in about 2 lessons later, you will see DNA fine-tuning also. But just let yourself go as you see the great designer at work. It is incredible. And I want to make sure you just don't hear it and walk from it. I want you to really think about what they're saying. We're dealing here with entities, units, that in terms of that you'll hear the term constants. That would be a law, a constant. But also amounts of things are fine-tuned also. So there are constants relative to laws. In particular, I'm going to make you say this and repeat this so you'll get the word. There is something called the cosmological constant. Now, if you repeat that to somebody that's a friend, they will just think you are so smart. Yes, but you're going to hear it a bunch. It is a huge deal. And when I tell you what it is, you're really going to die. Okay, this is called the You're going to hear this now, and it's big, it's huge. I want you to get it. I don't want you to go to sleep here now. This is huge. Called the cosmological constant. Everybody say cosmological constant. Wasn't that easy. Now, here's what cosmological constant is. You ready? The cosmological constant, this is going to sound like Darth Vader talking or something. This is called, it's what it is, dark energy. Dark energy. It constitutes 72% of stuff. And you say, well, energy stuff? Yeah, energy stuff. Energy stuff. You will see. Dark energy has to be distinguished from dark matter. That's another quantity. The stuff we see in the world, stars, sun, moon, stuff in the world, in other words, is much less. It only constitutes about 2% of the things that are there. The things that are not seen, does this sound like Bible a little bit? The things that are not seen, in this case, dark energy, you think when you look out at the sun or when you look at stars and it's dark, you think that's just empty space or a vacuum. No. It's called the cosmological constant, but it is dark energy, and that has to do with gravitation. And if it weren't exactly right, then everything would die. There could be no cosmos. Cosmos meaning universe. Now, as we look at these videos, the first one I want you to look at is Michael, is it Sherman or Shearer? Shermer. Michael is the founder of the Skeptic Society and the Skeptic Magazine. He's the CEO. He's a very pleasant guy. He went from being a theist to a non-believer, skeptic. I won't call him an atheist, but a non-believer. But I want you to hear what he says about the significance of the cosmological constant. He was asked the question, and this is a Nova special. He was asked the question, what's the strongest point or case that can be made for the existence of God? You're a skeptic, and he says, cosmological constant. Fine-tuning. We've got a designer at work. Not only was there a creation, he created with such precision as to defy simply a logical, it just happened. It was just an accident. Now we've got a designer argument at work. You not only have a creator, you've got a creator, I'm trying to get us to preponderance of the evidence now. If you are an honest skeptic, is this going to start swaying? You're on the jury. Now, and if I were addressing the jury, here would be my points. My points would be, you already know now there's the high likelihood there's a creator because there was a creation. Doesn't one imply the other? Okay? It's not a proof like 2 + 2 is 4. But doesn't that start taking you there, Mr. Skeptic, in your skeptical ideas? Now let's talk about design. And so this nice fellow that I was talking to at the radio station that I had the meeting confrontation, if you want to put it that way, with, as I talked about these things, and then went to the third one. We haven't even gotten there yet. That's going to be the video privilege planning. That's about a 30-minute video that we will have, not next week, because we're not going to be here next week, but the following week when we resume on number 3. When I got into that, he was visibly, I kind of like body language. Have you ever, any of you read a body language book? Yeah, it's a few of you. I love body language stuff. It's fascinating. Like handwriting analysis. Have you ever done handwriting analysis? I used to really get into that stuff. That's fun stuff. But you can watch the body language, and it sometimes will really give away where your friend is. And in this case, my friend that I was talking to, as I went through the logic of point number 1, argument number 1, the creator, and then got into fine-tuning and clicked off some ideas about fine-tuning. But it didn't take too long, but he got the point. I said, if it's design, doesn't it mean there's at least you can infer a designer? And then said, but that's not all. And I said, and he was like, what next? And then I said, the position of the planet. I said, now if you want to go home and read or look at Privileged Planet, you can just pop it right up on your video on internet search. I said, this is just staggering. I'm not sure if studying these 3 things I would have, and I use Truex words, enough faith to be an atheist at this point. I would at least have an open mind. Why, Bill? Because the evidence had taken me way past preponderance. I'm not, you know where I'm verging on? I'm verging at this point, after I go through these 3 things, we're about ready to take up number 2. I'm verging on the point, frankly, of beyond any reasonable doubt. That's a criminal standard. So when I defend my criminal guys, yes, I'm a defense lawyer, plaintiff's lawyer, I'm a trial lawyer. Did I tell you all that? I mean, I'm admitting it. You can throw rotten tomatoes at me later, but just listen right now. Because what we're doing is the accumulation of evidence. And that's the point. When you're in a civil trial, it's getting you to the point where you are where? Preponderance. And I want you to remember that. Many of you have been in trials, you know what I'm talking about. Well, that's where I'm thinking the skeptic. And if you're a skeptic here today, I want you to have enough intellectual integrity not to feel like my reputation's on the line. When I was a skeptic, it never went there because I was aware of the danger. I could feel like it's me versus the truth. Listen, you go where the truth leads you. You go where the truth leads you, not where your ego leads you. I see this all the time. I had a discussion just this morning with a young lady who's a PhD in physics. And I said, I did not realize how much animosity among physicists there were till I started reading some of the things that they would say about each other. And the particle physicists who work with the experimental physicists, who hate the string physicists. The string physicists won't talk to the particle physicists. They won't talk to the experimental physicists. And this one guy was saying, yeah, they go up to the 3rd floor of the Jefferson building and they shut their doors and won't discuss anything with anybody except themselves. And you could tell these people, this is like a family fight. I thought, are these Baptists? You know? Really, I mean, boy, they just... So interesting. So my point basically is this. You've got enough evidence in front of you to start swaying you, Mr. Skeptic friend, like I was, more than what I had when I came back home again. And that was 40 years ago. The breakthroughs now are unbelievable. So I ask you to keep an open mind. I ask you really to think not in terms of your own, I'll be embarrassed if if my friends know that I've kind of given in to some theistic ideas here because I've been such an exponent for so long. Get that out of your mind. The consequences are too great. If this is true, we're talking eternal consequences, not just a right or wrong. There are eternal consequences. That is an incredible idea. So when you consider your preponderance and where you're going, I want you to really think in terms of the big picture and let truth speak and lead you. You're going to hear from Michael, in charge of the Skeptic Society, who I just want you to make sure you know how significant this is. So he will tell you, boy, big deal. Then the second one is going to be a clear explanation from William Lane Craig, put together a 6-minute video on the significance of fine-tuning. That's point number 2. So you will have the concept. Just watch closely. That's only 6 minutes. Michael is only going to be 20 or 30 seconds. You'll hear what he says and how it's significant. Then you'll have a fuller explanation than my poor ability to explain fine-tuning to you. Then I'm going to set you up. You're not going to believe the last one. The last one is just incredible. But I'll have to kind of explain the characters to you. So I'll jump back in between the second and the third one. Okay, Patrick, you ready to go? We skipped over something, but it was last week we had covered Neil Shindy, the PhD physicist from Duke. I was just going to remind you of those sites and things like that to go to. And we were going to look at Apologetics 3:15. I was just going to remind you of your resources. But we really don't have enough time, so let's go straight to Michael and the second video. Then I'll pop back in for a few seconds and we'll finish up with the third video.
Michael, you've written that the fine-tuning of the universe is the best argument for a theological perspective. Why did you say that?
Well, if I was a theist, which I once was, I would make that argument because the natural explanation for the fine-tuning is not all that great. And I don't think either side has a scientific explanation. I think it, at that point, ends up being theological and metaphysical, but not physics.
Okay. One quick, and you don't have to turn the lights back up. He said something amazing. He said neither side, neither theist or atheist, can explain it through science. Yes, Michael. That's right, Michael. We're saying God did this. God is the fine-tuner, not science. So Michael's saying there's no scientific explanation from our perspective how this could possibly be true. How could this be? So that's right. And we're not trying to say science somehow can figure this out because it's too incredibly remarkable to figure out. All right, now you're going to hear about exactly what this encompasses. So watch closely now because every piece of it is pretty meaningful.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
All right, the next video requires just a few seconds of explanation. I love the contrast and the back and forth, and the creator of this particular video has a good sense of humor too, and I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. Now, the guy that you start off with, you've already seen him on the screen, is Martin Rees, who is the Astronomer Royal in England. That's the highest designation one could have. It would be like Congress making you the official something. In this case, it's a government designation. Now, he looks scary when he comes on. He's like gaunt looking. The guy needs to hang out with me for a few weeks. I'll fatten him up. But he looks gaunt. That's his look, and he's dressed in black. It's kind of scary looking. But I've watched him a couple of times deliver, and he wrote the amazing book, Just Six Numbers. And this is another confirmation. This mathematics stuff. And if you go to Neil Shinvey's site, the PhD at Duke, he's got something on mathematics, and it's one of his presentations he does, Mathematics Proving God. I'd love to have, Pastor, where'd preacher go? I'd love to have him come here. We've communicated. He is so easy to talk to. Brilliant. Quantum mechanics is his specialty. But postdoctoral, and he's teaching at Duke just a couple of hundred miles away. Martin Rees introduces the issue. He says the universe seems to be composed of these such precision, it's hard to think of this as just an accident. Then you go to, they bring on a professor, a physics professor named Susskind. Susskind was ready to present a paper about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, with two other physicists. They were atheists also. Susskind's an atheist. I don't think he's an atheist anymore. A lot of these guys have gone from atheism, pantheism, to at least deism. You see a shift. You know what a deist is? If you know what a deist is, raise your hand. Pretty good amount. Okay. God made the universe and then said, pretty good, you guys, good luck, and walked away. That's deism. Okay? So it's too much to believe there was not a God involved, but they don't want a personal God to be involved, right? That's too much responsibility. It's called deism. Thomas Jefferson likely was a deist, likely. But Susskind will come up. Susskind was ready to present papers with two other atheist physicists. And this was before all the information on the cosmological constant, dark energy, began to just explode in the past 7 or 8 years. The paper was going to be, the cosmological constant, dark energy could not be, because of the fine-tuning involved would be so incredible, it would definitely demonstrate that something's going on by way of a theistic belief system. We certainly can't buy that. Therefore, dark energy and all the theories about it must be incorrect. Before it could be published in a kind of a 90-day wait period, a new set of material came out that became more and more conclusive that this was really a real thing. I told you this is cutting-edge stuff. Really, really. They pulled the paper back. But the conclusion of the argument was still there because it was public. What was the argument? If this were true, the paper went, this would lend too much credence to the idea there's a God. We can't have that. Of course, we know there's no God, so therefore, this cosmological constant thing cannot be true. Let's publish a paper that makes such a theological argument. And they went running with tail between legs. That's Susskind, who's now going to explain to you how incredible this is. He's going to say to you, we felt that, or they felt, talking as if he's not one of the atheist physicists who fit right in the category. We felt that this truth could be usurped by, listen to what he says, the creationist. Well, I have listened to that probably 50 times. And what's driving him? And what was driving them then and what's driving certain scientists now? They are so adamant that they do not want the evidences to show there is a God. They're actually willing to twist the truth and not look at the truth and let the truth lead them, rather than them try to disjoint things and make it out to be something that it's not. Now, I think he's exercising, at this point in time, some intellectual honesty. Then we go to the guy that rarely exercises intellectual honesty, and up will come Richard Dawkins himself. This is your first immersion into the neo-atheist, who wrote the book called The God Delusion. Why is it a delusion? Because we all know since Darwin showed how design, the appearance of design has really evolved. We don't need God anymore. Therefore, God is merely a delusion. It just, see, you've been deluded because you look out in the world and you see everything seems to be put together so wonderfully. It was just to evolve. So now that you know that, we're taking your delusion away from you. That's basically the idea behind the book. Oh, there's more to it. It's a probability argument he uses too. Now, he's going to be talking about fine-tuning also. He's going to be trying to explain how is it that these physicists come up with these finely tuned numbers. How do you explain this? His fallback guy is one of the greats, who's a Nobel Prize winner out in Texas, at Austin. And his name is Steven Weinberg. Now, Weinberg is nobody's fool. Weinberg, then suddenly you're going to find that the two of them actually had a discussion after Dawkins made these statements. Dawkins interviews Weinberg, and Weinberg essentially sets Dawkins straight. And he uses the term, you don't, and the body language is incredible. You don't, his hands like this, you don't seem to understand or the fix we are in. That's a quote. Listen to him say it. The fix we are in. In other words, there is no solution to what you think there's a solution to. It's too much. This is just 13 minutes. I probably, honestly, have listened to this probably 50, 60 times. I seem to get something out of it every time I watch it. You can Google. It's in your material stuff, and it's called Atheist Physicists Prove God, and it's just a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun. But the salient thing here is I'm picking this kind of video out so you see it's not just a Christian interpretation; it's their interpretation of where we are. The breakthroughs in science are fortifying us incredibly. And then you as a Christian come away with what? With there really was a God, and there really was a designer, and praise the Lord, I'm on the right side on this. You know, that could be the sense of relief because, remember, the consequences of getting this wrong are enormous. Okay, the third video, please, Patrick. I told you he was scary.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant, and when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the Anthropic scientists did not want to entertain. It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer. The scientists were between a rock and a hard place. Their own discoveries were pointing them towards an intelligent designer.
This is its dislike of mixing religion into physics. I think they were somewhat afraid that if it was admitted that the reason the world is the way it is has to do with our own existence, that could be hijacked by the creationists, by the intelligent designers.
There are physicists who will tell you that if you take about half a dozen physical constants, these are constants that physicists have no explanation for, they just accept that these numbers have the values that they do, and they then do theoretical calculations using their models to say if any one of these half dozen constants was ever so slightly varied, then the universe as we know it would not be possible. For example, if the gravitational constant was a little bit different, there would be no stars, there would be no galaxies, the entire universe would just be a uniform splurge of hydrogen, for example. You wouldn't have stars, you wouldn't have chemistry, you wouldn't have the formation of the heavier elements, you couldn't have life. And they do the same trick for half a dozen other physical constants. A good example is Martin Rees, the present Astronomer Royal, in his book, Just Six Numbers. If the universe, if the constants of the universe are indeed fine-tuned, how do we explain it? How do we explain the appearance that the universe is tuned to bring us into existence? Well, theists say God did it. God twiddled the knobs and tuned the physical constants to have exactly the right values. That, of course, is no explanation at all because it leaves unexplained the tuner. It's just pushing the problem back one step. So we can instantly discount explanation number one. Explanation number two is adopted by physicists, I think Steven Weinberg, who was quoted earlier in this conference. Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Texas, I think his view is that we don't yet understand enough physics, and when we do, when we have the longed-for theory of everything, the TOE, we will then realize that these knobs are not for tuning. There is no freedom. There are no degrees of freedom. There's only one way for a universe to be. having accepted the word of physicists that there is an element of fine-tuning, and I've tried to lay out three possible explanations. One would be God, which, as I've said, isn't an explanation at all. One would be the multiverse, and then anthropically, with hindsight, saying we have to be sitting in one of the universes that could give us. But the third one, which I've attributed to you, possibly wrongly, would be what I call the macho physicists, who say, well, it's just that we don't understand why these things are the way they are. One day we will, when we have a theory of everything, it will be understood. But it sounds from our conversation as though that I misrepresented you there.
I don't think one should underestimate the fix we're in, that in the end, we will not be able to explain the world, that we will have some set of laws of nature. We will not be able to derive them on the ground simply of mathematical consistency, because we can already think of mathematically consistent laws that don't describe the world as we know it. And we will always be left with a question, why are the laws of nature what they are rather than some other laws? And I don't see any way out of that. The fact that the constants of nature are suitable for life, which is clearly true, we observe.
The final idea, which I think probably most physicists at least have some time for, is the multiverse theory.
No one has constructed a theory in which that's true. I mean, it's not only a speculation. The theory would be speculative, but we don't have a theory in which that speculation is mathematically realized.
Right, yeah.
So, but it's a possibility.
And the fact that the cancellation is so precise means that the number of universes in the multiverse you need to postulate in order to anthropically be comfortable with it is very, very large.
And it must be at least 10 to the 56, or in fact,
exactly,
if you think you have some idea about fluctuations at even shorter distances, I think you would say at least 10 to the 120. In fact, that's a little disturbing.
Once again, physicists find that a bit of a stretch. They find it not exactly implausible, but they think of it as a bit of a cop-out. I actually think it's rather an elegant explanation, I think it's probably true, but I don't know enough physics to know.
In case you got lost in that last part, here would be the idea, is winning the lottery. That's an infinitely impossible lottery to win. Well, if you chose numbers that were 1 in 10 to the 120th, that would be a number that would, if you sort of line them up, would extend out to the end of the universe in terms of getting them all right. That's how far-fetched such an idea is. Okay, what's the fallback? Well, maybe there are an infinite number of players. If it was that, we're only talking about one of the constants here. There's only one of them, which is the most remote. Actually, to get the real number, you would take all the constants. There are about 23, 24 of them that fit significantly into that 1%. You'd have to add the exponents to get your real probability. How many of you took probability in college or something? I love probability. It's a fascinating field. But what you would have to do is actually extend the number even further. This is just one of them. And you would have to actually believe that our universe, against all those sort of odds, just happened. Everything clicked so perfectly against such incredible probabilities that it defies any concept of reality. It simply would never happen. Now, that is that we happen to be the one and only. Yes? We need to go. We're closed right now, as a matter of fact. So the extension out is virtually impossible. So that is point number 2. It's fine-tuning. Point number 3 is going to be your literally an extension of this. So read your notes. Not next Sunday, but following Sunday is going to be if you would read to about page 20, then we would kind of be up, and that gets you to your converging evidences issue, okay? Thank you very much for coming, and see you in 2 weeks.